everybody's on the team and everybody has different abilities.
Hey everybody, Andy Powell here with the Allcast Podcast. Welcome, listener. I hope you enjoyed. Nothing is off the table. And today's episode is the first group podcast that I have done. We have the lovely Sonia, who is just an observer, a listener, and we have Mitch and Josephine Dunn, who are community members, and we have my friends Shane and Natalie, who are also members of this community, as well as myself. And we engage in a good discussion on some different topics regarding current events and how they affect our society and the importance of rites of passage. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Nomadicscapes LLC. Your flooring, demolition, cabinets, concrete, and drywall needs will be expertly handled by Benjamin. If you are in or around the Verde Valley region of Arizona and you need any kind of remodel, reach out to Nomadicscapes LLC at gmail.com for a free estimate and a 15% discount with the code ALLCAST. So rites of passage is something that's super important in today's world because we got the trans stuff, the screens, these kids that are either fatherless or have broken families, and it's just so much more common now than it ever has been. There's that phrase, strong men create good times create soft men create hard times. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Do you think that in easy times we have more of a lack of purpose or a lack of challenge, so we create challenges where they're not necessary, whether that's drama in your everyday life? It's almost like the human being needs obstacles to overcome. And so, if everything is so convenient, provided for, and we have screens and we have technologies and we have supermarkets and we have all of these things, there's less to work for, which I guess also takes away from the coming of age because men never have to go out and hunt to provide for their families,
there's
things
no
like that.
earning.
Yeah, and there's no hardship. There's not enough hardship for us to have to work for. So people, I think that's where that sense of entitlement comes from, is people get used to not having to work for stuff because it's provided for them.
So our mutual friend Anahata, who might also want to do a blessing for our baby. Oh. She lives up in Sedona, but she was talking on, I think it was Kyle's podcast, about how she's the reason how I've met Kyle. But she was saying how when her kid, she had twins, and when they got, I think that they were she did multiple rites of passage for them. And it was she took them hiking. Then they had to carry their own pack. Mm-hmm. Then they had to, no, Mom, it's hard. I don't want to keep going. My back hurts. Nope, you got to keep going. We're going to the top. You have to overcome the pain, mentally, realize what you are capable of, And then as they got older, obviously, the rite of passage shifted. And, but it, gave the kids a sense of confidence, that they could do hard things. And also when you have to dig deep, it helps you learn more about yourself,
Absolutely.
All right, so welcome everybody. We are missing Josie. We have Mitch, Sonia, Shane, Natalie, and myself. Not all of us will be talking, but this is our first group. This is my first group podcast. And so we're just going to go with the flow and see what happens. And if something comes from it, great. If not, then we had a great time talking together.
Cool.
So we started off talking about rites of passage and yeah.
Coming of age.
Yeah, coming of age. And I guess question for Mitch, what have you had anything in your life that was like a rite of passage?
I guess if you could consider a divorce a rite of passage, yeah. Got married very young, and it lasted a few years, and it was great while it lasted. And then both of us kind of grew up, and it ended, and it ended quickly, and I had to grow up real fast. It was the first time I'd ever lived alone. I got down to 2% body fat in about 3 months. I wasn't eating. I was devastated. But yeah, I learned how to do things on my own, and how to not be with somebody, how to be alone. I don't know if that's a rite of passage, but it sure felt like it.
All that is definitely a rite of passage, I would say, and I think a important point of the coming of age or the rite of passage is about being alone, being able to take care of yourself. Because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else, have a family and all that. As far as that, I would say is an unintentional rite of passage.
Almost definitely.
So Shane and I were talking about establishing some kind of a foundation and a framework for, okay, young man turns this age or reaches this level of mental clarity and maturity, and then you take him out and do these particular things. And what those things are, I don't know. It could be different for every person. Hey, Josie, come on in. All right, so I explained to the others that they're sharing that mic and they'll swivel it over to you when you want to talk about something. And right now we're just talking about rites of passage. So, yeah. So, yeah, something severely lacking in this country, in our society. And like I mentioned to you, Shane, a few minutes ago about that phrase where hard men create good times create soft men create hard times, which is what we're in now. We have a lot of soft men, and we're coming into hard times. So we need to be able to build men up to serve women and children rather than to self-serve or to break up the family, leave the family, things like that. And we need men to be godly so that they are grounded in the identity of who they are.
Speaking as somebody who's not directly involved with the school system yet, our baby's not even here, so it's not something I have a direct connection to. But from an outside perspective, it seems like a lot of the teachers and the current school system prevents and discourages a lot of this as well. And
yeah,
I think the challenge is going to be finding a way to communicate to parents that what the kids are getting from school isn't adequate, and they actually need other resources to help develop their children into the men and women that they need to become or should become one day.
Yeah, like they don't teach you how to do your taxes in school.
Balance a checkbook,
budget. Period. There's no. At least when I was in school, there was nothing like this. They teach you about economics and stocks a little bit, but the American education system was developed from the Prussian military. They were like, okay, well, how can we indoctrinate these kids to do what we want for this amount of time during the day? And that's how the current model of American school system was developed. So that's our first problem.
Yeah.
We got to change the structure of it, because most kids aren't meant to sit there for hours at a time and learn in that format.
And then they're medicated when they move around too much, or they're acting out, and you don't understand, or they claim not to understand why it's happening, or that there's a chemical imbalance. And busy boys are not a bad thing. That's a pretty natural state for young men to be in.
And it's important to feed that.
100%.
Because if you look at a boy or any young boy who's I don't know, age 2 to 10 or so, they'll all do a lot of similar things. They'll make weapons out of things. Mm-hmm. They'll destroy things. They'll make forts.
Throw rocks.
Yeah, throw rocks. It's a lot of the same stuff. So if you can harness those types of activities and turn them into something usable that serves them and their family and the community, then you can turn around a community in a matter of a generation or two.
Well, just talking about your ranch and what you're doing right now, Mitch, there's opportunity for... Okay.
Just project a little bit.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I think there's opportunity to bring kids into something like that. And it could be community related. It could be, benefiting the parks. It could be picking up trash. It could be building a bridge. It could be helping community members that are doing things that we could find practical ways to bring these kids in. And I think if we start small and you go through the relationships you have and you find parents that are willing to do it, you get these kids just doing anything physical, get them around good men, Christian men, people that have a moral compass and have faith. And I think that's the start. And I think it grows from there.
Yeah, I believe that. Just last week, my grandson visited from Mississippi, and we spent most of 2 days just out on the ranch. And before I knew it, he was dragging an axe around, chopping wood, feeding the chickens, and getting in the arena with the cow, and just all kinds of healthy stuff that he doesn't do at home when he's playing video games. And I homeschooled 4 kids pretty much on my own. We have neighbors who live next to us that have 6 kids, and they homeschool. And their kids are the most polite. And they're very strong Christians, this family. And I don't think I've heard any one of those kids ever swear. And they've got morals. They're always out climbing trees and building forts, like he was saying. They've got 2.5 acres, and they use it all. They've got chickens. They just got a new dog, and they're spending all their time trying to train this puppy. It's funny to watch. But I believe that homeschooling at this point is probably the best way. There are groups that people, can join. There's homeschool groups, and I'm sure there'd be plenty of volunteers who would want to have a shop class, who would want to show people how to change their tires, how to change their oil, things like that. Just basic fundamental things. There might be somebody out there that, be willing to teach math or things like that. But the actual practical activities that people learn on a daily basis that were not being shown in school, I think that homeschoolers could get together and start a pretty strong organization. And I believe it's better for the kids. My son didn't ever occupy a seat in a classroom until he was in college. And 3 out of my 4 kids went to college and graduated and have degrees.
On scholarship.
Yeah, on scholarship. They're amazing. So, my parents and everybody with mainstream educations back when I was younger, they told me, oh, you can't homeschool. The kids need the socialization. They got plenty of socialization. We visited with other groups, other homeschool groups. They played at the park. My son played for the high school golf team as a homeschooler, and he was the #1 player for 4 years. So there are things like that we could put together as a community that I think would be effective, because the education system these days is, in my opinion, pathetic. Yeah, it's broken.
One thought I've had, because this has been in the back of my mind for a long time, there's some people doing some kind of rites of passage things on Vashon when I was up there, and so my mind has been kind of spinning around. And one of the things, talking about active boys and needing to get that energy out first, giving them physical challenges, I think is a good way to start, right? So you put them through runs, martial arts, whatever it is, sports, but something to where they're physically challenged and wore out and breathing heavy. And I think then you take them into these other places later in the day where you teach them how to change tires, and you build, the education around practical things that we need. Talking about empathy, talking about values, or even at the campfire at night, right? The tribal campfire, I think, is an important aspect of that, where everybody shares and you can joke around them, but you have that common tie where you
connect.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. But you have to have, like you said, the struggle. So if kids aren't struggling and you're not pushing them and they want to sit on the ground and watch PE instead of taking part in it, that's where you're failing them. You can't allow children to one, not be to be disrespectful in any way, but also not to engage. It's got to be a community effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What comes to mind is a really strict, like restriction or an emphasis on lack of screens.
Yes.
Because like you were saying earlier, I think Natalie, you were saying that it's like a false high or like a dopamine release that isn't a natural response to an actual human interaction. So it starts to feed this neural pathway that is like, okay, well, I want more of that. I want more of that. Mm-hmm. It's an addiction. It's like, it's easy for kids to get addicted to screens. So if you have a setting where you're outside or even in a classroom where you're teaching these things like empathy or how to make a fire or how to recognize poisonous mushrooms, whatever, it's, if you don't have this, instead of using the mushroom identifier app, maybe take the phones and just the phones stay away the entire day. There's like a very limited window of using the phone. I don't think the phones are there at all. I think that's the mandatory thing as part of the program. I think you say, this isn't a time for this. This is what's killing our society right now and ruining our children. Yeah. We've
got to take that away and teach them how to function and communicate without a screen in front of them.
Yeah, like a phone-free zone.
Yeah.
I taught for 2 years back on Catalina before I moved off the island, and we would do a lot of exercises with kids, both from the inner city and then also from, I'd say, like more privileged areas, but like Orange County areas such as that. And the kids that, had access to these devices, these phones, it was really challenging for them to spend more than an hour or so without it. In fact, I had one student at one point, we were getting ready to go snorkeling, and everybody's suiting up in their wetsuits. We're teaching them how to put on their fins and how to put on a mask and snorkel. And this one little boy, he was almost having a panic attack, knowing that he could not take his phone with him down to the waterfront to get into the water, to the point where, to prevent him from throwing the biggest temper tantrum I'd ever seen, we let him bring it down and he had to set it on the swim steps, but he couldn't take it in the water. And that was like devastating for him.
How old was this kid?
10 years old.
Okay.
11 to 12 at most. And it was just an interesting observation. We would also do things with them where we'd hike them out onto a trail where we were away from buildings, cars, roads, anything like that. And I would have them sit down. I would set a timer for 4 minutes, and I would ask them to sit in silence, but while they were sitting there, to take note of all the different noises that they could hear, all the different sounds. And at the end of the 4 minutes, a lot of times the kids would be like, I heard absolutely nothing. This is boring. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I can hear the ocean lapping up against the rocks. I can hear a boat in the distance. I hear the wind and the flowers and the trees. I hear birds. I hear, a multitude of different things. But because these kids have almost become desensitized, kind of like we were talking earlier, the natural things, the sacred things even kind of become obsolete because the stimulus from devices, just that constant dopamine hit. They become a slave to the dopamine loops in their head, but the amount of stimulus it creates or needed to create the dopamine is such a high degree that, the everyday little things don't quite get them there anymore.
Yeah. And I think there's two responses to that. If you have kids that are, getting to be 10 years old and they've already had these things kind of set into their path, mm-hmm. then you can undo it in certain ways, like a focus practice like that, or like
sure.
As somewhat of a meditation practice.
You have to make it exciting and engaging for them. And there has to be some kind of, because dopamine in a sense is a reward, in nature, it would be a reward. And so you have to like kind of recreate that, give them praise when they've, had a realization about something, or, hiked to the top of a mountain. Make it exciting as opposed to, boring or whatever they may deem it to be otherwise.
The other option, I think, is if you have a kid young enough, you don't let them go down that path in the first place, which would be ideal.
I've had kids that I've babysat where when they were young, I'd call it adventure time, or whether they were in a stroller, in a pack, holding my hand, we'd go out, we'd count the squirrels running across the road, do fun things like that. And then as they get introduced to the phone, whether it's because mom's busy. It's never intentionally like I'm just going to ignore my kid. It's like, I'm busy. I've got so many things to do. The family unit is like, everybody's so busy these days. The easy thing to do to entertain a child is either turn on the TV or give them a tablet or a phone, whatever it may be. But that's where, instead of letting kids go outside in the backyard and build a fort and be creative, in today's world, it's just easier and more convenient and sometimes safer, I suppose, in some situations to just give them that instant entertainment so that you can go about whatever you need to do. But like I watched this one little boy, and we used to go to the beach. We'd build sandcastles, all of these things. And I'll never forget the day that he did not want to build a sandcastle. He wanted to watch YouTube at the beach instead. And I was just like, wait, this is really sad,
Mitch, when you were raising your children, I assume the phones weren't an issue at that point, right?
No.
The cell phones. So what were the obstacles that you saw during that generation?
At that point, and I didn't even know it because I was still unaware of a lot of things in our society that have, I'm going to say, manipulated us. But afternoon TV, evening TV, Nickelodeon, there was a couple others, and there were some shows that they would watch once in a while, actually on a pretty regular basis, like iCarly and a couple other shows like that, some Disney Channel stuff. And, back then everybody thought Disney was as pure and as you could get. And then, we know what it is today. So those kind of things, they almost indoctrinate the kids. Beyond that, I took my kids out a lot. On the weekends, we'd go to lakes, we'd go hiking, we'd go to parks with big playgrounds, things like that. We actually did a lot of exploring, and I tried to keep the TV to a minimum.
Was there a lot of backlash when you would cut it off? Was there a lot of...
Not really.
Not
really. No, they were good kids. It wasn't too bad. I could take them to a restaurant. In fact, quite often we'd go to a restaurant and I would have people come up to me later and say, "Your kids are very well behaved," which always made me feel good.
Absolutely.
These days it's tough. The grandsons, we had both of them. One is 11 today and the other is 6. And we had both of them, the 6-year-old we had for over a year living with us, and the 11-year-old was he lived with us for like 5 years. But people use cell phones and video games and things like that as babysitters. Mm-hmm. And once a kid is used to that, boy, it's tough to break them of it. It really is, because like you said, they don't want to build sandcastles anymore. Mm-hmm. They just want to go, "Grandpa, can I watch some TV?" I can't tell you how many times I've heard that and had to say, "No, we're not going in the house right now. There's no electronics." And Josie and I have a no electronics rule that it pretty much stands, as it's the rule. And once in a while, they'll get the reward of watching some kind of TV or maybe playing a video game.
1 hour.
Yeah, and it's limited.
Yeah.
It's limited.
Yeah, 1 hour, maybe twice a week with electronics.
They get
with
so
us.
addicted so quickly.
Yeah.
It's all they can think about.
Yeah. And it's never YouTube. It's never Disney Channel. It's pure. We have something called Pure Flix at our house. It's a subscription to. It's similar to Netflix. It's Christian only. It's a Christian only channel that you can subscribe to, similar to Netflix, but that's all it's on there is Christian stuff. That's it. And they can only watch that for 60 minutes, probably twice a week. That's it. And you can ask me all day to watch TV. There's no remote, and you can't turn it on. That we have smart TVs. You can try turning it on, but you can't use the TV without the remote. So, yeah, no phones, no computers, none of it. No internet, absolutely none of it. So...
Josie, what do you think about rites of passage for young men?
I think we as parents have, well, we're grandparents now. Mitch and I raised 5 kids all together. We as parents have responsibilities, first of all, to teach our children that we're not their friends. That's the biggest thing that parents have lost sight of. I'm not your friend. I'm your parent. That's the first thing that we need to make clear to our children. And there are things that come in stages that are age appropriate. When you say rites of passage, there are things that are age appropriate. But I think that we have to separate friendship from parenting. I think that discipline is a lost, I'm not going to say art, but a lost thing that parents, they don't do. We don't discipline our children as we should. I think that people are afraid to discipline their kids.
Yeah, afraid of what it might look like to other people or something.
Correct. I think what happens in my home is my business with my children. And I think that my children need discipline or they're going to grow up unruly. And I don't believe in child abuse, but I believe that my children need discipline. And they'll be disciplined right now, and they'll be disciplined the way I see fit.
So how much friend type activity would you say you should engage in as a parent? Because you want to bond with that child in some form, like play. You want to play with them.
Of course. Yeah, I think we should play with our children. I think our children should feel safe with us. I think our children should come to us, and I think that we should rule with love, right? We should never rule our children with fear. I think we should inspire and motivate our children to be the best that they can be. But I think that we shouldn't overlook behaviors that we know are not tolerable, right? And we shouldn't be disrespected in any way, ever. Like, some kids call their parents dude, right? I'm not a dude.
Yeah.
I'm mom, right?
Yeah.
Or, there's just some things that parents do not address immediately, and they should.
Yeah.
Yeah, respect is a huge one, right? We shouldn't overlook a lot of things.
Yeah.
Even a small lie is still a lie.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I have a little story. My daughter was 3, and we were in Albertsons. And when she was 3, you guys will probably remember this because you guys are like the age of her. Do you remember the cartoon Mulan? The Disney Mulan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was this figure skater that was Asian, and I cannot remember her. She was Olympic figure skater at that time. And there was a book about her in the checkout aisle at Albertson's grocery store. And she was probably 3 in the cart, and she grabbed it, and she wanted me to buy this book. And it was just an adult book. It wasn't something that she would read. And I told her no, and I put it back on the rack. Paid for my groceries. We leave the store, get home. And she had picked up the book. Stole it from the Albertsons. 3 years old. We go back to the Albertsons with the book. We find the security guard, and I made her explain to the security guard at 3 years old that she stole the book. And I made the security guard explain to her that she could go to jail for stealing. At 3, almost 4.
My first thought is that that's too young because they don't understand the concept, but at the same time, when and how do you introduce the concept in a functional way for the child?
Of stealing, right? Of taking something that wasn't paid for.
Or
right?
that didn't belong to you.
That doesn't belong to you,
Yeah.
right? You don't take things from a store that you don't pay for.
Because it's easy to show that to a child when it's taking a toy from another child. That one seems pretty apparent. Like that kid gets upset. It's very obvious, that whole situation. But so then you would just explain to them like you would any adult. Like, hey, this is wrong and here's why.
Right. Because here it is. If you go to a store, you have to pay for things. You don't leave a store without paying for it. Mm-hmm. There's serious consequence. This man works here, and his job is to stop you from stealing.
Yeah.
He has a badge, right? He's pretty scary. To this day, she doesn't steal anything.
Awesome. With my son, Shane, I knew you had something to say. If you want to swivel that over to Shane. With my go the other way. If you could spin it around that way. Thanks. Those cords can get pinched. Sorry. So my son, we were in a grocery store a few weeks ago, and he was super hungry. And I was just like, "Yeah, dude, we're getting you food, getting it as soon as possible." Picked up some bananas, and he wanted to start eating the banana and stuff. And those bananas you have to pay for by weight. So I can't give you the banana until we pay for it, dude. I'm really sorry. And so I explained it to him, and he got upset. And so a few minutes later in the store, same thing. So just through that repetition, eventually we got to the checkout. And the first thing I did was put the bananas on there, weigh them, and then explain to him, hey, now that we've paid these, I can give this to you. And I opened it for him, and he ate it right there before I was done checking out. So that repetition, and then that, like, the example of, okay, now we've passed this threshold, so now it's okay. That, I think, he kind of got that afterward.
Just to help them understand the process. They're little humans learning. But
Yeah,
I think that's good.
and you have to repeat it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Would it be out of the question to actually take something from them to kind of initiate that?
I
Or
wouldn't.
to understand. I mean, just like, hey, how would you feel if this was taken from you and now you no longer have this? It's the same. Is that too complicated for a small child?
I don't. It might be too far for them at that early of an age, 2 or 3. I understand the example, and that's my first go-to is like, oh, I'm gonna snatch this thing out of your hand. How do you like it? But at the same time, that's not the loving act toward the kid, because they're gonna feel taken from, and that's gonna overwhelm them because they don't have the capacity to hold that emotion yet.
Interesting.
That's what I think.
The thing I was thinking about during all this, we're talking about disciplining children, which is already difficult enough these days because, you say one thing at school and now the teacher reports you. Now you have child services at your house and now you risk losing your child. And kids make things up, and there's always this fear if they get upset. And I think that's a big risk. And the thing I wanted to bring up, did you hear about this new law now they've passed in Washington, is like they can actually remove your children from you if you don't acknowledge their gender choice.
They're asking for blood at this point.
I mean, they're pushing people to the point where you can no longer parent your child, and like what is the recourse for that? And it's getting scary because you have to discipline your children. But if the state now is stepping in and threatening to take your children away because you're not acknowledging something that's obviously become, what I would consider just a mental illness, and it goes back to the nature nurture, right? So much of a developing child is the nurture, and when they're presented these crazy ideas from other children, and not to say that there isn't some kids that have legitimate issues maybe with
Their gender.
But I think most of it comes from nurturing or from the nurture aspect. And
I don't mean to cut you off, but I would argue that it's not a mental illness until your brain is fully developed, or it's a mental illness that takes place during development if you are taught to be confused about things, if you're taught that this is how things are when that's not really reality.
Correct.
That's not the case. So
good distinction.
It's
Yeah.
But
it's confusing them, right? So it's giving them bad information. And again, you're being told, Mitch, when you're raising your kids, they're not going to have the social development skills because you're homeschooling them. But what we see now is kids that aren't being homeschooled are getting the social pressure from teachers, in a lot of the cases, and other students that are telling them they have to think a certain way and to fit in with the group. The peer pressure literally pushes them down these roads where, again, in Washington, you can, I can't remember if it's Washington and Oregon, but I believe they can actually perform some sort of gender surgery now at a minor age. And I might be incorrect, but it's getting crazy. And that's the next thing on the horizon if it isn't currently there.
It is getting crazy, and it's out of control.
Yeah.
Those agencies are out of control. We've had some personal experience with CPS and DCFS, and they take things into their own hands. There's a lot of people that work for those agencies that have their own personal agendas, and it's for the most part, from what I can tell, it's along the same lines as the people that are passing those laws and saying, you got to recognize what your kid says they want to be. And in that same light, I've seen a lot of children grow up to be young adults who still think they can be anything they want to be. And I know that's a great idea. Yeah, all I got to do is work hard and I can be whatever I want to be. But people are born with gifts. Certain things that they're good at, certain things they're never going to be good at. And a boy's never going to be a girl's never going to be a boy. I mean, it's just not going to happen. They can dress like one, they can act like one, but they're not going to be one. You're never going to be a Major League Baseball player unless you have the gift. That there's so many things like that that we don't know. We're not told, we're not taught that we have our own talents. And like we heard this weekend in church, everybody's on the team and everybody has different abilities. And you can't really compare yourself to somebody who can throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball because they're given a gift, and that's their gift. Other people are incredible with numbers. Mm-hmm. You know, other people can look at something and in their minds, they can visually disassemble it and put it back together and know it's going to work or it's not. I mean, there's so many gifts people have, but they have to learn to recognize what they have and not really chase the ones that are not given to them.
And they don't do that in the school system. They don't teach you to go for those gifts. It's, if you're not good at mathematics, well, now you have an F and you're failing.
Right.
And then what does that do to a child's confidence?
Oh, it destroys it.
And he might be phenomenal in something else, and just never realize it.
Yeah, so God-given gifts are something that actually exist. And it's something that I never really knew. I thought, you know what, I was always told, if you want something, you got to work hard, you got to put in the time, and you'll be able to reach that goal. Well, that's not always the truth. Mm-hmm. And it sets people up for failure.
Absolutely.
And, so then people get discouraged and they're like, I'm not good at anything. Well, there's something they're good at. There's something they're supposed to do. And I don't know how you teach people to find that, but chasing the things that they can't do is something that just, it can, in the middle of their life, when they're 30s and 40s, they realize, you know what, I've wasted 20 years on this dream that's never going to happen.
Yeah. I think Andy and I are looking at each other, probably thinking the same thing. Like, that's kind of where this coming of age, where you go from being a boy into a man, where you have to sit with yourself and say, what is my purpose? And you have to do the soul searching. And more indigenous cultures, it looks like going out into the bush or to the forest with just a spear for days and conquering your fears and bringing back your first animal. Or it looks like different things, throughout different periods of time, but we've kind of lost that. And I think it actually ties together a lot of the things we've been talking about, like you were saying, Josie, like having healthy discipline from your parents so that you know boundaries, so that you have to sit and think about your actions and the repercussions of your actions. Were they positive? Were they negative? Were they for the betterment of yourself, your family, those around you? Or did they put people in a bad position, including, maybe even yourself? All of these things. Growing up, I grew up in the middle of nowhere on an island, off the coast of California. And we definitely had healthy discipline. We also had a lot of responsibilities growing up on a ranch. Everybody participated. I remember a friend telling me about the concept of an allowance. And I went home and asked my mom and dad, like, how come we don't get an allowance? We do so many chores. And they're like, that's because we're a family, and that's what families do. Everybody, pitches in to make it work. And growing up, we really all did, and we took pride in it. It taught us a sense of, taking pride in your work, taking pride in your home, taking pride in your family. And, I'm so thankful for that discipline now, because now my parents really are like some of my best friends. And growing up too, I was never afraid of my parents. I felt like I could go to my parents with any problem. I felt like they were a safe place for me when I was struggling, with friendships or whatever it was. There was a very mutual respect because there was healthy discipline, and it was never this authoritative, kind of discipline. They really took the time to explain things And then if we still pushed the limit, then there was always a repercussion. But it taught us, to stay on that path and what happens if you go off. And, we had to assume the responsibility for it because it was our choice at that point. We knew, right from wrong. And knowing right from wrong, I think, is one of the things that is becoming quite confusing for children in today's world.
Yeah, so that if it was a dictatorship style of parenting, then you wouldn't have come away with all those lessons. And
I don't think so. I think I probably would have feared. I mean, there was times when I was like, oh gosh, mom's mad, what's going to happen? Or, we maybe were threatened with this or that. But no, I think if it was more that violent out of anger, it was always, even, when voices were raised, whatever it may have been, like, looking back, I know it was always out of love, like they were looking out for us. It was never out of anger. It was never reactivity or like a projection of their own things. It was like, no, like again, giving us the options and the consequences and really taking the time to explain things to us. But I think also because I was really blessed to have my mom. My mom was able to stay at home until my sister was old enough to go into kindergarten. And my family, we were a very tight family. And like I said, we all worked together. We were always going places with our mom and dad, whether it was like, the hiking, the whatever. We were always working on projects around the house or on the ranch. Everybody contributed. Everybody had respect for each other. So we never... like, I don't know if we're just rare, but we never went through that rebellion stage. We never were trying to sneak out. We were never into the party scene. We were never...
So it can be done.
I think it can, but like I was telling Shane one day, like we received the love and the guidance at home. And I think because we received that love, we weren't looking for it elsewhere. We weren't looking for... validation elsewhere because our home provided that for us.
Last week, Mitch and Josie and I met and we talked about gentleness, right? And it was the definition of gentleness that the internet gives is like, okay, a soft disposition, more or less. Yeah. And then we looked at like a theological definition, and it was like sweetness of disposition founded on strength. Prompted by love.
I like that.
That's what it sounds like the type of parenting that you received was, is that it's founded on strength and prompted by love. So there wasn't this feeling of like a lack of love, so I need to rebel to get this attention, to get the love that I'm seeking that's not there.
Right.
So like my parents' generation, or they didn't really have, like my dad didn't go through a rite of passage. He went through the military, which is probably the closest equivalent. And then same thing with myself. I went through the military, which is maybe an equivalent, but based on what I know of the military versus what the possibilities are of a rite of passage that's structured and intentional, they're night and day. Military is like, okay, you're going to have to, if you're young and you join the military, you're going to have to grow up fast and it's going to be harsh, which that's its own thing, but it's more hazing, it's abuse, it's verbal abuse, it's emotional abuse. It's like, it's, boys being boys without any kind of real good leadership or guidance.
And it's still like, kind of speaking towards what we're seeing in the schools, what we're seeing in the world at large. I really feel, some call it the bifurcation, some are calling it, the splitting of timelines. You have like the fallen world and you have those who are kind of returning to more of what we're called in God's eyes. You really see, I feel like, the split now. And I was listening to a guy and he was talking about the school system. And he's like, honestly, the best thing we can do at this point is to abandon it and to start new things. And there's a lot of people around the country, Tim Kennedy, some of these other guys who are starting these alternative things that are going back to, these more traditional,
well, it's like the society that founded America. It's the pioneers. It's you're hunting food, you're growing food, you have a relationship with nature, and you know the limitations.
Sure.
And you continue to explore.
Yeah, going back to those traditional roles within your family, within your community, and then also to those traditional skills, you know?
Going backwards a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, with the thing how Washington or Oregon has passed some law where they can take your kids from you if you don't choose to affirm their gender identity. Let's talk about law a little bit. What is a law? Who gets to pass these laws? I didn't vote on that law. I don't live there, but I'm pretty sure most of the people that live there didn't get to vote on that law. They voted on the person, the individual, the representative who is doing them wrong. And I think when those types of things happen, we as the people who are the majority of this country need to have a swift justice system when it comes to that stuff. We need to immediately remove those people from office. Maybe it shouldn't be based on a law, because we're legislating ourselves into a corner. We're legislating ourselves into not having a country anymore. So maybe sometimes we need to put the law to the wayside and exercise real justice. And it doesn't mean hurting somebody. It means stripping them of that title. It means removing them from that office. And maybe that can be done without having to use a law or a court system. I know this sounds wild and rash, but if you think about what a law is, it's something that a man wrote down telling another man what he can and can't do. Ideally, you get to vote on it. That doesn't happen in America today. But what's most important about upholding the laws that are truly just is, we talk about the Constitution. It's our own personal constitution. What do you believe in? What are you willing to fight for? That's what created this place, and that's what we need to teach and get back to if we're going to succeed at all in retaining this place that has been built to be so beautiful, that offers the luxury of people not having a frame of reference for gun violence and thinking nobody should have guns because I've lived 70 years. The lady told me that the other day. I've lived 70 years and have had zero issues where I thought I needed a gun. Well, that's wonderful. You know what got you there? Guns that built this place into the safety that you get to experience for 70 years of freedom from fear. So it's about our personal constitution, really. What are we willing to uphold?
That's it. It's funny, we were at Costco earlier today, and I helped a lady out to her car with her groceries. And very frail, older lady, probably in their 70s or 80s.
That's so nice of you.
She asked for help in the store, and then we went outside, and it was raining, and we saw her, and they were kind enough to let me run over and do it. Very frail, couldn't pick up a pack of Coke by ourselves. And I get over to the trunk of her car, she pops it, and she's got pistols in their cases and targets. And it was one of those moments I'm like, wow, you shoot? And she's like, oh yeah, it's just really frustrating. You know, in practice, when I go to the range, I'm great, but in competition, I'm just not hitting the mark. And honest to God, it made me feel so good. I'm like, God bless this woman who cannot physically defend herself in any way, you know, hand to hand with anybody if somebody's trying to mug her. But I promise you, if we had crime in this community, she'd be probably okay, because she's taught herself that skill set. And again, going back to disarming the country and anti-2A people, they've lived in this incredibly nerfed world that we've been blessed to live in. We live in a very safe place, generally speaking, unless you live in the inner city of Chicago or other parts of this country in the major cities. It's very, very safe, and people don't realize that the world is not fair and it's not equal, and you will be victimized if you don't know how to take care of yourself. And sometimes it's a matter of just being situationally aware, and sometimes you just end up in a situation where you can't physically protect yourself. You can't defend yourself against somebody bigger and stronger. And that, the gun issue, it's always brought back to the gun. The gun is the problem, and the problem isn't the gun. The problem is the education. It's the fatherless homes. It's the way we're raising our children. It's the mental illness. It's the fact that we just had doctors admit that serotonin is not responsible for happiness, and they've had everybody in this country pushed onto SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and we wonder why all these mass shooters are on pharmaceutical drugs. And it's like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that It's the mental health. It's not the guns. The guns prevent good people from being overtaken by bad people, and a tyrannical government from dominating the populace. And that's the whole crux of the problem. And I understand where people come. Where they're coming from. They mean well, and they're frightened by guns because they don't have experience. But it's not a realistic. And we have 600 million guns in this country.
I don't know.
Something like that.
Not enough.
Not enough. But one, it's not realistic to think you're going to take everybody's guns away. And two, we would lose any personal rights. We saw during COVID how quickly our rights were taken away and our freedoms. You've seen these other communist countries where people can't defend themselves and what that looks like. And it's a pretty rapid progression into a very freedomless society.
Yeah. When you have people in key positions like Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, screw your freedoms.
Exactly.
Screw your freedoms. Really?
Yeah.
No.
Who came to this country and has
immigrated,
been very successful because of the things that are afforded us because of our founding fathers and because of firearms and because of our.
On that note, we live in a very safe place. This is a Second Amendment sanctuary city, or sanctuary county, actually, in a big part due to this woman right here in front of the board of directors just spilling her guts. And she swayed, I think, the whole board to vote and pass that. And what that means is our sheriffs and our law enforcement have vowed to not support anybody that's trying to, if FBI, anybody comes in here and is trying to take your guns.
The federal government.
The federal government, our local sheriffs and other law enforcement will protect you.
Our county, Yavapai County, is a Second Amendment sanctuary county, which means if the federal government tries to come to your door and take away your weapons, they cannot, because the sheriff of your county will not allow it, because they voted as a county to protect your Second Amendment rights. It's on YouTube. You can look it up.
And you were a key part in.
I testified in the Board of Supervisors, and I demanded and swore that you will have to pry my gun out of my cold, dead hands.
Among thousands of others who live in this place.
Thousands of others in this county. That was 4 years ago, I think. Right?
Sorry to dominate I don't want to dominate the conversation, but it's something that is a really major problem in this area right now, and it's all the people that are coming here because these major cities they're no longer a safe or, I don't want to say comfortable place to live, but they become dangerous, and people don't want to live in the major cities anymore. And so they're coming to Prescott to find, they come here and they visit and they go, oh my God, it's so safe. It's so clean. Everybody's so friendly. Everybody's so polite. And then as soon as they come here, they're like, but God, man, everybody's got guns. And it's like, it's the most obvious thing. And everybody I talk to, I'm like, why do you think it's safe? And how do we not have all these mass shootings here with all these guns? It's like, again, community. There's a culture here where you're taught to respect them. And I think once you get into a large city, you lose that ability to have that community, to have that kind of foundation.
Yeah, in the larger cities, it's impersonable. It's everyone's in my way. I got to get to where I'm going. There's a disconnect between the bonding of people. And Josie, would you mind explaining to us exactly what a red flag law is?
A red flag law, actually, they have them in many counties and in many states in our nation. What that law does, if that was to pass, it's as simple as this. You have an argument with your neighbor. Sometimes we don't get along with our neighbors, right? Or our in-laws, or our crazy exes. They can any one of those people can make an anonymous phone call to their local police department or their local sheriff's department and say, Mitch is a threat. He's threatening to harm himself with guns that he has in the household, or he's threatening to harm others with these weapons in the household. Which means that law enforcement agency does not need a warrant. They can go to Mitch's household, kick in his door, and take away all his weapons and take him into custody. That's what a red flag law does.
So it sounds to me like a red flag law is another piece of legislation that was written to loophole around the Fourth Amendment of a warrant, like needing a warrant to enter someone's house.
Correct. And it also violates your Second Amendment rights. And it also stops you from protecting your own home because you don't even know who's coming inside your house. They're kicking in your door. And so if someone kicks in my door, I'm shooting, right? I'm shooting you. But these are law enforcement officers with no warrant, and they're kicking in your door.
That's the problem. They're first of all supposed to have a warrant, supposed to show you the warrant. In some cases, they don't, depending on the type of situation, the level of criminal that they're going after, which I get from a law enforcement perspective. But with a red flag law, it's like anybody can call and tattle on anybody.
Anybody. And it could just be, it could be your crazy ex-husband, ex-wife.
That's a great way
the
to
neighbor.
Get a lot of people shot in a short amount of time.
Correct. The neighbor, your in-laws, you're having an argument with a coworker. They can just say, hey, Mitch or Josephine is, she's a threat. She threatened me, or she's threatening to harm herself, or she's threatening to harm so-and-so. You don't even have to prove it.
Is that by county or state that they pass these?
It depends. Sometimes it's by county, sometimes it's by cities, sometimes it's by state. And they were trying to pass that here in Arizona. And I thought, like a mad woman, and you're not taking away my gun. There's not going to be a red flag law in Arizona. There's not, ever.
And so the big fear right now is Katie Hobbs has come in, and from my understanding, is trying to change a lot of laws and rules and change out all the people in the Arizona, in the state government, and
Katie Hobbs can try, but Second Amendment stuff she cannot. She will not and cannot. Especially she cannot overrule the sheriffs because the sheriffs are the highest law of the land. So she cannot overpower the sheriffs ever.
Well, once again, we're going back to one individual that supposedly got elected on the up and up, which is obviously not the case. We've seen from the court proceedings of the Carrie Lake lawsuits. So this one person, even if she did get elected properly, she's trying to change these laws that are contributing to the demise of our ability to protect ourselves and to maintain our order in this place.
with the border crisis.
So that's a whole other issue, the border crisis. But when it comes down to it, America was founded on rebellion. We're all rebellious. The American spirit is rebellious. So if you're going to have one person try and tell us, you can't do this, you can't do that, good luck. You're gonna be met with a lot of resistance. And of course, it's going to be labeled terrorism, domestic terrorism, when realistically the domestic terrorists are the ones who are trying to legislate us away from what we were founded on, whether it's God or the Bill of Rights.
I think I've heard on several different podcasts, people are kind of calling this entire movement, what's happening with our children, what's happening with the gun laws, what's happening with immigration, neo-Maoism, because they saw this in communist China. And the way that they're manipulating children, and they're going after the children first, and then attempting, again, we do have some issues with gun violence in this country, but it's not because a gun exists. People use cars for violence, they use knives for violence, they make bombs, people do all kinds of things, and they will find ways to kill people regardless. And guns are a tool for the average citizen to protect themselves in the most reasonable manner.
Are you able to break down that phrase neo-Maoism? Because I've never heard that. I don't even know what to make of it.
I mean, I'm probably going to butcher this, but Mao's, from my understanding, my limited understanding, is Mao's takeover in China. Part of that was part of the plan of attack was polluting children's minds into turning in their parents, into I think it was basically destroying the educational system, the teachers. Am I incorrect in this, or is this? Okay. Well, you've got it up, so.
I just pulled it up here. So I'll read what Wikipedia says, and if this sounds like BS, like a lot of Wikipedia actually allows, then we'll find another definition. But Wikipedia says it's the Chinese New Left. The Chinese New Left is a term used in the People's Republic of China to describe a diverse range of left-wing political philosophies that emerged in the 1990s that are critical of the economic reforms instituted under Deng Xiaoping, which emphasize policies of market liberalization and privatization to promote economic growth and modernization. So it sounds like under the guise of growth and modernizing and doing good things, they're making things more liberal and privatizing things for economic reform. So it's...
I'm speaking more on the way that they went after children to turn them against their parents and against institutions in order to bring about change. And that's, in my opinion, that's what I see happening here. And everything else comes off of that. These are all, we see it with our dollar. We see it with everything they're attacking in this country right now.
Critical race theory.
Anything to divide the country, right? So
Anything.
they divide you by gender, by race, and really what it is, it's class more than anything. It's the wealthy, the uber wealthy, the giant corporations against everybody else, but they've divided us because they control the media, they control the institutions that teach our children, a lot of the religious institutions. I'm sure all of you have seen this, churches that are now saying like LGBTQ plus whatever is...
Yeah, they're flying a rainbow
Jesus.
flag on one of these churches nearby.
Exactly.
And it's
And
like, well,
they're disrupting all the institutions that have kind of kept this country, any cohesiveness. That's what they're attacking.
yeah. So if I refer back to one of my other podcasts with a woman called Jessie Saboter, she talks about her time in the Luciferian Brotherhood cult. And she lays out pretty clearly that all of these things are multiple facets of division. So if you bring it to the spiritual, you have good and evil, right? God and the devil. You know, use what terms you like for whatever tickles your fancy. So the evil is meant to divide. And part of the lesson, the outline that I made yesterday for today, we're going to talk about peace. What is peace? Peace is completeness in God. It's completeness, being whole, being one, unified with God. That is where peace exists. But the absence of God is strife or being removed from peace. And the way that happens is through separation or division, which is 100% what's happening right now. So if you bring it to the spiritual, to keep it simple, the devil is doing everything possible to divide and separate people, whether it's through false titles like Black Lives Matter. Yeah, that's a great sentiment, but that's not what that movement is. So it's all about division and divisiveness.
Absolutely.
Along those lines, division and divisiveness, they go hand in hand with confusing people and taking away their...
Okay, so you're saying with the division, it takes away identity.
Yeah, basically they're dividing people from themselves, because with the LGBT and in the race and right and left political, Christian versus pretty much everybody else, and one of my daughter told me the other day, and it made a lot of sense, one of the main things that proves that Christianity and God exists is the fact that Christians have been under attack forever, always, and we still are. But people don't even have a sense of identity. They don't know if they're male or female. They don't know if they're black or white. They don't know if they're right or left. And so they've almost been separated from themselves, divided from themselves. And if you don't have an identity, you're much easier to manipulate. So if we keep God in our kids' lives, and I was raised without that, and so my moral compass was everywhere as a kid. I tried to be good, but I didn't always know what good was. And there's another little tidbit I wanted to interject earlier. We're talking about raising our kids, and I don't know how anybody's going to take this, but I always, when my kids did something that needed discipline, or I always approached everything with love, but I tried to put myself in their shoes, and then ask myself how I would want to be treated if I was in their situation. And it's not like, I just threw a rock through the window, I want to go get ice cream. It's, I threw a rock through the window, I know I did something bad, I got something coming, but I still want to be respected, and I don't want to be screamed at. So there is discipline that can be kind, exactly, with love. Yeah, you know what? You messed up, son, but, you're going to be standing in the corner, or whatever your currency is, I'm going to take that away for a while. Whatever something means to you, it's got to be important, and my kids never wanted to disappoint me.
Yeah.
If they sensed they disappointed me, then that was almost punishment enough.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I remember if I disappointed my parents, it just hit me in the heart, and that was the biggest teacher for me.
Exactly. That's something that you don't want to do unless you don't respect your parents, and there's a lot of kids now that don't. So
Sure.
You gotta, in my experience, start early when they're 2.
And there too.
And they understand that you're the parent. They may not be able to communicate, but they know when you're disciplining them. And I'm not talking about, spanking or anything like that. When they're 2, that's pretty much not on the table. But when they can sense disappointment, and they'd much rather have a happy parent than a disappointed parent.
I appreciate what you said about putting yourself in the kid's shoes. I think that's really important, because otherwise, like Andy was saying too, sometimes when they're young, they don't understand, they don't understand the bigger picture. They just know what they want or what they're trying to get out of you. And it's like, my parents really did take the time to explain, and a lot of times you see parents just being incredibly reactive, and it just throws the child into it, and they carry, that's, those initial years, I think you really do set the stage for how you're going to navigate life later on. And if you're given skills to, make conscious decisions of the right and the wrong, and what are my choices going to be, what are the repercussions of my choices, or how can I do this respectfully, or what is the correct way to ask for something, whatever that may be, those are far better skills than to, be reactive and demanding, because you almost mimic your parents, you're going to,
I think a lot of the times that people are reactive to their kids, obviously, because they can't, it's a new situation, they can't handle it, the kid's not doing what they want, they're not in control. They lose.
They themselves don't have discipline almost.
It could be. And one thing that I really like that the Bible says that I've been using with my son lately is let your yes be yes and your no be no. So if you give your child a response like, hey, no, we're not going to watch TV right now, be decisive and hold firm in that, no matter how cute they are, no matter how much they say, Daddy, please, no matter how much they try and convince you or throw a fit or try and break things, you can't just pacify them. Mm-hmm. You have to let your yes be yes and no be no. Boundaries is the key.
Boundaries.
So I worked in celebrity protection prior to moving out here. And with one of the clients, the punishment for the kids was taking away their electronics. That was the punishment. So the electronics were on all day. They did something they didn't like. Well, 10 minutes, they can't have their electronics.
10 minutes.
Oh yeah. That was the electronics timeout. Just to give you an example of how some parenting is done. And again, going back to people that have too many comforts, like you said, easy times make weak men, and this does the same for children. And when people have too much money and too many, the kids aren't even a responsibility anymore. Other people, in the security world, we pretty much raised a lot of the kids with the nannies, and and we were more, we were more present in the children's lives at certain times than their own parents.
Wow.
And again, it goes back to they wanted to be friends. They didn't want to have any friction. They wanted to be buddies, and they were more, and again, I don't want to say this is across the board because I did work for some great people, but in certain occasions, it seemed like the kids were more pets than their offspring that they were trying to give, morals and guidelines to.
Wow.
I think there's a time to be friends with your kids, like when they become adults. Like my kids are my bestest friends. They are calling me. My oldest daughter, she must call 3 or 4 times a day, right? Aurelia, she calls 3 or 4 times a day. Our oldest son, he calls every opportunity he can, right? Ian must call, I don't know, any chance he gets.
Yeah, it's not very often that he gets a chance because he's very busy, but he makes the effort. He makes the effort. Another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was people tend to treat their children as children when their goal
Like babies.
is to be an adult. You're raising an adult. You're gonna make that person into an adult. That's your goal. You're not teaching the kid to baby talk. You want to talk in complete sentences. You want that child to understand how to communicate. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make is they try to raise babies when their child's going to be an adult. That's the goal. You want to teach that child how to be an adult.
A lot of times I think that people don't know how sharp children can be, how smart they are, how much they retain. So if you speak to them in fragments, and they're only going to regurgitate fragments.
Andy, I just in like observing you and your interactions with your son, I've always been very impressed by how you navigate even challenging situations where, when we come to pick him up for babysitting and he wants to stay with you longer, but you have to go to work, you take the time to explain to him, and, he expresses his emotions in a healthy way and everything, but it's like because you take the time to explain, you can tell he's like computing and he's like understanding, even though he's still sad about it. I was just curious, like what your personal, because we're going to be first time parents here soon. What is your personal take on, disciplining?
It's a great question. I've gone through a couple different light phases trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And oftentimes right now, even at this age, it doesn't seem like he really requires discipline. He requires knowledge, love, and an understanding of what's happening. So discipline, as of right now, is only just barely on the table every once in a while. So I'm still figuring that out. At his age, he needs to understand in a loving way what's happening and why, because it's confusing. He doesn't know why dad's leaving. And I feel so bad for him, because I remember very vividly when I was young, my parents went out on a date one night, and it was just horrifying for me. And we had a babysitter, and I was running around screaming, wanting my mom or my dad, and they were just gone. And eventually this babysitter wrangled me into like my bedroom and shut the door and like locked the door, and the light was off. And so I was freaking out, and I heard her say from outside the door to my sister, "Don't worry, he'll cry himself to sleep." I remember this very vividly, and it was pretty rough. So I just want to give my son every opportunity to understand what's happening, so that he has the confidence that, oh, dad's coming back. Dad means well. Dad's not abandoning me. Dad loves me. Dad's doing something necessary that I don't fully grasp, but it sounds like it's necessary. So that's kind of my approach to all that. And that's the best I got at this time. Yeah, it's really sweet, because he responds in a way that understands, like he gets it. He might not know all the words I'm saying, but he gets that I'm trying to convey something, and this is how it has to be, and that's okay. Yeah, and I try to tell him, just like you were saying, Mitch and Josie, about being an adult. Don't talk to him like he's a baby. I tell him, like, hey, life's going to be hard sometimes. This is one of those times, and that's okay.
You're allowed to be sad.
You're allowed to be sad, and just keep it super simple, because he's young. Keep the concepts simple and just, simple. Going back to like martial arts, like Shane, you've done a lot of martial arts over your life, and you can always go back to the simple because the simple is effective every time.
The most important piece of parenting advice I would like to give you, unsolicited, by the way,
We'll take it.
always tell your child the truth. Age appropriate truth. Always.
Santa
Is a lie.
Santa is a lie. So don't raise your kids like Santa is.
It's a pagan holiday.
I see. You two know about this. I don't know too much about this. I know a little bit.
We'll have to save that for another time.
Yeah, that can be another time. But
Easter is a lie.
Yeah, Easter Bunny.
Halloween is a lie.
Yeah. So always tell them the truth. I like that, and I agree with that.
Always.
We should probably wrap up here soon and see if anybody else has anything we want to talk about.
One thought that I had earlier that I didn't really share was another pitfall I saw with a lot of parents is the projection of what the parents wanted the child to be as opposed to what naturally either they wanted to play baseball or football and forcing things onto kids. And I think a lot of parents live vicariously through their children. Maybe they didn't accomplish things that they wanted to do. And I think that was just something it's just been sitting with me this whole time. And again, coming into parenthood for the first time, trying to take myself out of the equation and not like want to push the kids into jiu-jitsu or like things just immediately. And I don't know, did you ever struggle with that when you were bringing your kids up, or was it just easy to just let them do their thing?
I tried to look for talents that they naturally had. One of our daughters is a singer. One of them is just an amazing Christian. And who'd have thought? Because she was emotionally destroyed for years.
And she's the strongest.
And she's now the strongest, yeah. She found God, and she's absolutely amazing.
One is the soccer. Aurelia is the soccer, and I was the soccer. So she played soccer for like 6 years. She played every sport because she wanted to try it. And I went to college on a soccer scholarship, and she was the soccer star for like 6 years. But she tried every sport, just like I did. Evie was karate,
Yeah,
too,
karate,
and a
and
singer.
she sings, just amazing singer.
Ashley was karate and softball.
Yeah,
Ian was golf.
yeah.
Every child just directed, they picked their own path. They did.
Yeah.
They told us what they wanted to do.
Yeah, you don't push them, you don't hold them back.
No, they took it
No.
as far as
Yeah.
they wanted to, you know. And
Evie
when-
was in Prescott Idol.
Oh, really? Yeah. Have fun. Yeah, I think it's important. Like, I've been thinking, we're kind of stewards for these souls that God gifts to us. And it's not us. I mean, we have to guide them, obviously, and, in that sense. But they are also going to come with gifts that God has sent them here with. And our job is to help foster and nurture that.
I agree. And I'm going to supplement that a little bit because I agree with that for the most part, but I also have another idea that's super important. We were talking about identity earlier. And as a father, I've learned that it's my job to give my child an identity. Now, whether he wants to retain that 10, 15 years from now, that's up to him. But for an example of that would be, I'm going to teach you how to defend yourself. You will learn how to defend yourself, and that's going to be part of your identity. Not that you have to compete in jiu-jitsu or practice it for decades at a time, but you will know how to defend yourself. You will know your way around a gun, around an engine, around the woods, things like that. This is where that rite of passage comes in, because you want to instill these super important things for their ability to take care of themselves and others and raise up women and children. But you also want them to be able to move within that, to select what they want for their hobbies or for their pursuits or for their career, etc. So trying to find a good balance of that, I think, is great.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
like,
builds confidence.
Yeah,
tools for their toolbox, and then they get to choose what tools they want to build their house with.
that's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, well, great.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for
Yeah,
having
Yeah,
that's
me
fun.
too. Thank you all for contributing your perspectives, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
me. Thanks, Sam.